So I'm pretty sure this is live. Let me just make sure here. So today should be covering inflation, GDP. Oh, there we go. Okay. Inflation, GDP, and again, like I said in the email, one of the most important things we'll look at in the course, which is the aggregate models with aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Like I said, if there's anything that's practically guaranteed to be on there, it's probably an aggregate model. It's Unit 3 is supposed to make up something like 35% of the test, something along those lines, so pretty important. Again, if you have any questions as I'm going through this, make sure you let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. Just post something in the chat, try to pay attention to it, or shoot me an email if you need to. It's up to you. But that said, start off today with inflation, move into GDP, take a look at the business cycle before we get started on the aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So last time we talked about unemployment, which is one side of the spectrum of all of this. The other side of it is inflation. So unemployment, like we talked about last time, is people who not only don't have jobs, but people who don't have jobs and want them. And inflation then, on the opposite side of the spectrum, is going to be essentially the devaluation of currency over time. And as we talked about a whole bunch in the course, and as we're going to start talking a whole bunch about, it's you usually end up having one or the other, and you don't really have both. So let's go ahead and look through some problems here. Again, too, if you have suggestions about how I could do this better, please let me know. I'm doing this for you guys, like I said, so let me know. All right. So we'll start off with the more social studies side of this with the costs of inflation. There are the three that we really talked about in class, and hopefully this aligns with it pretty well. So one of the big concepts with it is going to be who it is that wins and who it is that loses from inflation. And you have people who are borrowers and people who are lenders. So borrowers then being the creditors, they're usually banks, something along those lines. Oh wait, no, borrowers are the people who are borrowing the money. So you and me, or firms perhaps, something like that. And then the lenders will be the banks or credit unions, whatever it is you want to call them. So who are winners and losers from unexpected inflation? So with unexpected inflation, we'll go back to our paint here. I can't find anything better. If you do know of something better, again, please let me know. I want this to be as good as possible. So if you borrowed $100 from a bank at a 3% interest rate, meaning that after 1 year, you'd have to pay back $103. Who is it then that would end up winning if inflation, for whatever reason, over the course of the year, I don't know why I put a percent there, I apologize, $103, that should have been, that's what you have to pay back after a year. Okay, so if for whatever reason there's a 10% inflation rate over the course of that year, though, who is it that ended up winning / losing, or ended up winning or losing there? So, if you're paying back $103, that is now essentially 10% devalued, is that $103 worth the same as the $103 was a year ago? No, it wasn't. So that said, then, who is it that ended up winning there? Was it the borrower or was it the lender? Probably the borrower, right? Because essentially, you're still paying back the $103, but that $103 is effectively worth 10% less than it was a year ago. And the bank only accounted for the 3%, not the 10%. Well, they probably accounted for like 2% because that's the good rate of inflation, and not the 10. So let me go back to alt tabbing. There we go. So both borrowers and lenders lose. Nope, nobody wins from unanticipated inflation. I mean, in a broad sense, probably not. But in specific instances like this, then yes. Both borrowers and lenders win. Nope. Borrowers win. Lenders lose. Looks like that's what it'll be. And then borrowers lose. Lenders win. There we go. Good job. All right. Melisandre asks you to loan her $600 until next year. She offers to pay you 10% annual interest. You are very suspicious of her motives and believes she is trying to gain at your expense. What does Melisandre expect about the inflation rate if you know she is trying to benefit at your expense? So, we're getting back to who it is that's going to win from this inflation here. So last question we were looking at, it was the borrower who would end up winning. So let's get a new document here. New, don't save. All right, so $600 at 10% interest, meaning that next year, how much would she be paying you back? Give you a second to think about that. That's right, she'd be paying back $660 at the 10% interest rate. Now, say though, if you do think she's trying to pull a fast one on you, and she was going to be paying back $660 no matter what, how is it that you'd be hurt by that? So, for example, if there ended up being 100% inflation, right, which probably wouldn't be, but it's very well possible. We see it in some countries around the world today. It would be very much, you getting $660 back is practically nothing, because if there was 100% inflation over that year, you'd expect to get like $1,200 back instead. So, choose one answer. Rate of inflation will be more than 10%. Probably not. Or wait, yes, it probably will. I apologize. There will be deflation. Probably not. Rate of inflation will equal 10%. That's just her really needing the money, probably, because 10% is a pretty crazy interest rate in our times. The rate of inflation will be less than 10%, probably not, or there will be no inflation at all. If there's no inflation at all, she definitely wouldn't offer you 10%. So likely will be more than 10% because of that. So Bank of King's Landing, I'm guessing whoever made this was a fan of Game of Thrones with the names we've been seeing here. So the Bank of King's Landing has made many loans to the Lords of Winterfell. The bank is considering whether they will benefit or not if the rate of inflation changed. So, under which circumstance would the bank realize an unexpected benefit? So again, same thing. I was expecting a little bit different out of these questions, but same thing. We've been looking at the borrowers winning from this so far, but what kind of scenario is it that has to happen for a lender to win in one of these situations? So, if it is that borrowers are benefiting when inflation is higher than expected, then it's going to be the opposite for lenders. Lenders will benefit when it is lower than expected, because essentially, if you're paying back 3% interest, but there is only 1% inflation, then they're effectively making a solid 2%. And that's the real interest rate there instead of just the nominal interest rate, which is something we'll get more into later on. So let's read through these here. So when the interest rate charged is lower than the actual rate of inflation, so no, if the interest rate was lower than inflation, then it'd be what we've been looking at, where the bank's not quite getting their money back. When the actual rate of inflation is equal to the anticipated rate of inflation. It says unexpected benefit, so this is kind of usually where it falls, is it's expected and they do make profit. But again, it's unexpected. So when the actual rate of inflation is higher than the anticipated inflation rate. So not quite, because again, that's higher inflation than what they were expecting. They end up losing money. When the interest rate charged is equal to the expected rate of inflation. Is that how in there? Oh, anticipated. Yeah, it's essentially the same thing. And then when the actual rate of inflation is lower than the anticipated rate of inflation. So it will be E here, because again, I guess we'll visualize this here. So if we have our $600 that they've loaned out, and they're expecting 5% interest, then they want to get $630 back a year down the line. Now, if there's 1% inflation over the course of that year, then they're sitting pretty. They made a solid 4% of that, meaning of the $30, they made $25 profit. So it's going to be good for them as the lender there. So E, there we go. Good job. All right. Which of the following agents is most likely to be negatively impacted by the deflation in Westeros? So this is going to be kind of getting back to the costs of inflation, and we'll talk about what the three different types of costs or problems that arise from inflation here in a second, because I don't think it's going to be on here. So, negatively impacted by deflation, meaning that the value of the dollar is essentially going back up. So the elderly citizens of Westeros who receive $200 every month as a pension. So since currency is effectively becoming more valuable, if they have that fixed rate that they're receiving, is that $200 effectively going to be worth more, or is it going to be worth less? It's effectively going to be worth more. That's right. So, that $200, it's going to have more buying power. Again, how we determine the value of a dollar is what you can buy with it. And irrespective of everything else. So the king, who owes a lot of money to the bank, a lot of money to the Iron Bank. So again, that's that borrower-lender situation. And the borrowers, what did they benefit from? Was it unexpected inflation or a lack of inflation, really? They're going to be the ones that are benefiting from the unexpected inflation, so it's probably not going to be that. It probably is going to be that because it's looking who's negatively impacted. A girl who has stored $20 in her mattress for 2 years. So that $20 over those 2 years, it's not accruing interest or anything like that. But it's effectively more valuable after those 2 years, right? Because instead of being, $20, it might be $21. Hodor, who has $500 in a bank account earning 1% interest every year. If he's getting 1% interest every year, that's pretty good for a savings account. So he's sitting pretty, especially since that's now effectively worth more. Or the Iron Bank of Braavos, who has loaned $1 million to the king interest-free. So if they loaned $1 million to the king interest-free, I might be getting myself confused here. Hold on. Because it's interest-free. So if he's paying... That's confusing me. They're still going to get the $1 million back, presumably. So I'm assuming that's not the answer, but I guess we'll see. Yeah, okay. I just want to read through that, though. Banks can benefit from a lower price level, means the money. Okay, there we go. So it's since they're receiving the same amount back, they're not necessarily negatively impacted. All right. So one thing I want to go through here quickly then is the three different types of costs from inflation. So the one that's most common is going to be, I'll try to see if I can do a text box for this, is going to be unit of account. So unit of account, let me get bigger text on here, a little bit bigger. So unit of account. So unit of account costs, give you a second to think about what those might be. Our next one are menu costs, and then our last one would be shoe leather costs. Or these are like the negative impacts, like why inflation is bad. Unit of account is going to be the most common, the one that people think about the most. Menu costs is going to be kind of what impacts businesses or firms the most. And then shoe leather costs will end up being what it is that ends up affecting people or some firms the most as well. I'll give you guys a second or two to think about what these are before we dive into them. All right, start from the top. So unit of account. So again, this is the one that people most often think about. This is kind of what we've been looking at in these questions, where it is that the value of the dollar itself is changing. If you have $100 in a savings account, then it's going to be worth less a year from now than it is today. And when I say changing value of money, I mean the value is going down. So it's quite literally that this unit of account money, it's no longer worth what it once was. And people lose money by holding it, essentially, because it becomes less and less valuable over time. Menu costs. Again, this is the one that's usually going to more so be affecting firms, which then gets passed on to the households and stuff like that. So menu costs, then, of inflation are businesses having to change infrastructure in a sense. to keep up with changing prices, things like that. It's in modern times not as big of a thing because we've had relatively low inflation over the past maybe 30 years, I want to say. 30 years, really, since the 90s, since Bill Clinton. So anyways, menu costs. So this is businesses having to change their price tags on things, or changing their menus. So, every time prices change, if there's been 5% inflation, then, restaurants need to make their menu prices reflect that, or stores need to make their price tags reflect that. And, it costs money to do that because they're spending money on the raw resources. And then shoe leather is more so a historical one. Still a thing today, though. Thinking of the best way to word this. So shoe leather, like the where it gets its name from, is especially back in the time of like bank runs and things like that. It's the time that you spend, or it used to be the time that you spend, quite literally going to the bank and getting the money out of it and running down your shoes and things like that. Nowadays, it's more so transaction fees, moving money around, whatever it might be, in order to keep up with inflation and not lose too much money to essentially the unit of account. Like, this is what drives the other two in a lot of ways. All right. So let's see. We did costs of inflation there, price indices, and inflation. This should be. It might have been better to do this the right way. Who knows? All right. So this actually looks like measuring inflation. There we go. So we get to that consumer price index that we talked about in our course. So all of this is based on like that idea of the market basket of goods. Judging how much prices have changed by looking at a select few things over the course of a couple different years. Usually there'll be a base year or something along those lines. So looking at this, the country of Ambrosia calculates inflation using a consumer price index. Between 2016 and 2017, the CPI increased from 200 to 220. So what was the inflation rate between 2016 and 2017? So in order to do this, again, this year you can use a calculator, so I'm going to very highly recommend you do so. And this one specifically, what you would do is you would divide the year by divide the base year by the year. So in this case, it'd be 220 divided by 200, is it? And yes. Giving you, or other way around, one of the two. I'm pretty sure it's the other way, or year by the base year, yeah. And it would end up being a 10% change there, because 20, the difference between them ends up being a 10% difference, so it'd be a 10% inflation rate. Which of the following best describes the consumer price index? The change in prices that a consumer would have to pay for a fixed set of goods. So that fixed set of goods, again, that is our market basket. So the change in prices as a percentage of the same goods in a base year. B, the cost of inputs purchased by firms in a year divided by the price of the same inputs in a base year expressed as a percentage. So it won't have anything to do with inputs. The dollars a person needs in order to buy a fixed collection of goods in a year compared to a base year. So that one's sounding pretty good. So we'll see between A and C there. Because it's CPI, it's not necessarily inflation itself, so it's kind of semantics. The real GDP produced in one year divided by the real value of that GDP in another year, nothing to do with GDP here, or the cost of labor purchased by firms in a year, nothing to do with labor. So it's either A or C. So change in prices. Change in prices that a consumer will have to pay for a fixed set of goods as a percentage, or the dollars a person needs in order to buy a fixed collection of goods in a year compared to a base year. So it's not going to be just the raw dollar amount. It is going to be based on percentages, so good job there. Which of the following describes the relationship between a worker's real wage and nominal wage when there is no inflation? So again, when we're getting to real and nominal, that's a huge thing, especially with GDP. So real is going to be adjusted for what? Think about that for a second. That's right. Real is going to be adjusted for inflation, whereas nominal is just going to be the raw value, the raw dollar amount, whatever it might be. So What describes the best relationship when real equals nominal and there is no relationship between them when there is no inflation? So real wage is lower than nominal wage. If there's no inflation, it's not that. Both real and nominal decrease, but in different amounts. That's not that. Real wage and nominal wage are the same. I kind of gave that away when I was reading the question. It is very likely C. They both increase, but in different amounts. Not quite. Real wage is higher than nominal wage. It is not. All right, here we go. We got a good CPI here. So the table below shows the CPI over several years in Bloomin' Onion land. So it's Outback Steakhouse this time. Nice. Which of the following conclusions can be drawn based on this data? So, prices increased between 2015 and 2017, but decreased between 2017 and 2018. So between 2015 and 2017, it went from 94 to 104 as the price index, with 2016 as the base year. So that is true. But decreased between 2017 and 2018. The CPI does go down, so that's looking like it could be the right answer. Real GDP increased every year. This doesn't measure real GDP, so probably not the answer there. Prices increased over all 4 years. Probably not the wrong answer because it does, probably not the right answer because it does decrease there. Bundle of goods changed each year. There's nothing here to imply that. Again, this is all made assuming the same bundle of goods. And then 2015 is the base year. For the base year, it will always be 100. It will never be anything different. So it's very likely A. Yep, good job. So awesome. We leveled up there. All right. So that about cuts it for inflation. I haven't seen any questions as I've been going through this, so I'm thinking we're good to go on it. And now we'll get into GDP. So GDP, before we get into this, I guess I'll run through some stuff up here. So GDP, I'm sure you guys very well remember as we went through the course. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. And what is that? What exactly is GDP? What are some of the qualifiers for what actually gets included? Maybe think about the formula here for a couple seconds before I go into it. All right, GDP then, it's going to be the final value of all goods produced in a country's borders within a certain year. In a country's borders in a year, in a given year. So it's going to be final. Final value is a huge thing there. So getting to some of the things that aren't included, it's going to be, it's the inputs. Inputs won't be included. So, tires are an example I like to give in class. They can be an example of many different things there because tires can be sold individually. So they could be a final good. They could also be an input, if they're selling new cars. It would be very much not individually counted, but rather counted as part of the car. Used goods aren't going to be included, So used goods. So if you're buying, from half-price books, I'm pretty sure they have a lot of used books or resold books. A lot of bookstores for colleges. You guys will be going off to here soon. They sell a lot of already used books. And things of that nature. So used goods won't be included. It's also stuff off of eBay, Craigslist, whatever else it is. Black market activity, not going to be included. So that means all of those street pharmaceuticals that we talked about in class, none of those get included. All of the babysitting gigs you guys have, that's definitely black market activity. So that won't be included. Your little brother's lemonade stand. Black market activity, it can and should be shut down by the police. They're evading taxes, so that'd be black market activity. This is going to bother me if I don't do that. All right, black market activity. So that'll be the big things. The other big one, especially for our course, is going to be transfer payments. Won't be included. Give you guys a second to think about what transfer payments are before we go into the formula here for GDP. So, that's right, transfer payments. They are payments from the government to people without anything having been produced or made like that. Best example is going to be Social Security, welfare, any kind of welfare services. Great example of it. Because it's not included because, again, there's no good that's being produced. There's nothing that is added from it, so it's not considered for it. Now, that said, what is included? We're going to have our 4 different domains of GDP. As I'm sure you guys very well remember. It's a huge concept for the course, especially leading into our aggregate model. So the first and biggest part of GDP, give you guys a second here, biggest part, especially for us here in the United States. This is going to be C. For consumption, consumer goods, whatever it is. So this is going to be spending on things like food, clothes, non-durable goods. Anything that you're not expecting to keep for too terribly long. I mean, televisions, furniture, stuff like that. Even though you would keep it longer, it'd be part of consumption. It's not going to be stuff that you use to make other stuff. Now, the one that's always tricky, I brought it up in class too, is going to be education. Prices of getting a college degree, your tuition that you're paying, that is in fact included in consumption. With the argument there that you're building human capital, so maybe it should be included in one of the other domains of this, but it is not. Let me do this here, because remember we're going to look at it through the formula as well. So our next one is going to be I, with I standing for what? Standing for investment. Investment. There we go. I can type. Promise. So investment then, the I in this, that's going to be a lot of the spending from firms, especially on their capital. All the new machines, all the stuff to make other stuff is going to be a huge deal. Especially stuff that they take out loans for, as we'll get to more later on in the review. Next one going to be G. I'll give you a second to think about that. So G with government spending. G with government spending. So government spending going to be on things like infrastructure, different public projects, things like that will be huge. The government buying stuff, whether it be for the military or other projects, things of that nature. This is where those transfer payments become important, because transfer payments are not included in government spending. Won't be included. And also government spending in and of itself is going to be a huge thing for our review on next Tuesday when we get to fiscal policy, because it is half of fiscal policy, as we went through this course, we realized that a lot of the stuff that we talk about is related to pretty much everything else. And then we get to our last one, which is symbolized by X or XN, NX, something like that. See if I give you guys a second to think about what that stands for. NX. So it's going to be for net exports. Now, this one's, I guess, the trickier one of the 4, just because of the way that it is put into this. So it's net exports, meaning what the total gain is, on our GDP here in the United States. This is very much a negative value for us. And why? Why is it that it is a negative value here? That's right. It's because it is it's kind of we import more than we export. So the formula for this then would be exports minus imports, because when we're importing stuff, we're giving away money to other countries. Essentially, we're not giving it away. We're getting their stuff, but it's stuff that's made there, and then we're spending our currency on instead of on our own goods. So those will be the four components there. And again, especially going into our next big one of our next big topics for today. This right here, CIGX, GDP, however you want to say it, it is also just a fancy way of saying what on the aggregate model. Aggregate demand. That's right. So any changes in these four here will result in a change in aggregate demand. So it'll be a huge, huge thing. Now, jump into some practice questions here for all of this. And this looks like it's specifically more so going to look at real versus nominal. Again, real being adjusted for inflation and nominal just being the number. So this is we looked at this early on in the course, the different tables. I'm not guessing that something like this will be on the test, but it very well could. So we'll definitely go over it. So what is Neverland's real gross domestic product in year 2, assuming year 1 is the base year? So I'll get a screenshot of this, go back to my paint here, new, don't save. All right, so we'll crop this and open this up. So in order to find real, the real GDP here, based on all of this information, what we have to do is we have to take the year 2 amounts and do what with the year 2 amounts? We use the year 1 prices. That's right. If we were just doing nominal, we'd use the prices of the year. But since we're doing real, it's adjusted for inflation. When we're going to use year 1 as the base year. So in order to find it out, we're going to take 10 puppy shampoo. Oh, that's that. Hold on. There we go. I'm going to take 10 puppy shampoos, multiply that by 3, the price from year 1, giving us $30 worth of puppy shampoos. And then for year 2, we have 30 butter sculptures, multiplied by 5, giving us 150. Add these together, giving us 180. So our real GDP for year 2 is going to be 180, because again, we're using the output. We're just looking at the output values for year 2, but using the prices from year 1 because it is real. We're adjusting for that inflation. I keep on not getting it right. So what do we get here? We got 180. So it should be E. There we go. Good job. So 2017, Spamland's real GDP was 50 billion, and the GDP deflator was 120. So GDP deflator, it's very likely not going to be included. It's almost never going to be included on the real test. So what was Spamland's GDP in 2017? There should be about a 20% difference. So definitely not 60 billion. There is a 20% difference here. Definitely not 0.4, definitely not 20, likely not to be 41.6. There we go. Good job there. Justinia, a country that produces 3 goods: guitars, physics books, and sandals. And hey, Jason, good to see you. Good to see you here. Glad you could join us today for the review session. Which of the following would definitely cause an increase in nominal GDP, but not a change in real GDP? So again, real is accounting for inflation. Nominal is just the number amount. So if we're just looking at a number, a different change in that dollar value for everything that's produced, what is it that would be changing? And what would be staying the same based on this problem? So we're looking for an increase in nominal GDP, but not a change in real. So if nothing is changing on the real value, then it means that the output is going to be staying the same. But if the nominal value is increasing, that means that prices themselves are also going up. So quantity of good increases, nope. We can limit that or rule that out. Quantity of goods produced increases, can rule it out. Quantity of goods stays the same. This is the only one with quantity of goods staying the same. So it's very likely this one. And prices increase as well, and that's what we're looking for here. Because again, if real is not changing, that means that we're making the same amount. But if nominal is changing, that means something's happening with the prices. Because again, nominal is just the numbers, whereas real is what's actually being produced. All right, and then another one of these tables here to round this off. So production and prices in the nation of Justinia in 2016 and 2017 are shown in the table above. Which of the following best describes what happened to real and nominal GDP between 2016 and 2017? So let's see here. New. Don't save. Crop. All right, crop. Okay. So what happened real and nominal between 2016 and 2017? So quantity produced over here in 2016 and then quantity in 2017. So for real, with what we're looking at right now, It's the same amount for all of them on both sides. And if it's the same amount of quantity being produced in the 2 years, what does that mean for real GDP? Because remember, for real GDP, we're accounting for inflation, so we're going to use the same price level for both years. That's right. Real is going to stay the same, or it's going to equal in these 2 years. Likely worded as stay the same. And then nominal, what's happening in nominal, however? So with nominal, again, now we're just everything else aside. It's just the raw number value of all of this. So prices would be mainly what we'd be looking at here, since the quantity is staying the same. And since the quantity is staying the same, we see that the prices go up and nothing else changes. It's going to mean that nominal GDP is going to be increasing. So we're looking for an increase in nominal and real GDP staying the same. So real GDP increase, we can rule this out. Real GDP has not changed. This might be it. Nominal GDP has changed, though, again, because prices have changed. Real GDP has increased. Real GDP has not increased again, same amounts being produced. Real GDP has not changed, and nominal GDP increased. So D. There we go. D. Excellent work there. So good job. Done with GDP here, so get that crossed off the list. Now, for our last thing for Unit 2, we'll look at the business cycle. See what the practice question looks like for this before I get into this. We're not going to worry about the questions for the business cycle here. We'll just talk about it. So, business cycle. Again, with the economy, it goes through different phases. As of right now, our business cycle for the United States is about 10 years, is what it's estimated to be at, from like previous ones being at 4, as low as stuff like that. This is one of those kind of graphs that we've looked at, or models that we looked at early on in the course, and we're just going to focus on labeling here and what the different points imply. And this is especially relevant as we start moving into the aggregate model. So our business cycle, for our intents and purposes, going to look something like this. Again, the reality of the business cycle is it's a lot more, upward trending like that. The recessions, they're not good in the short run, but they're not as bad as they could be. So on this, think about what these different points are labeled here. And again, I apologize for the paint. I just haven't found anything better to look or to do with this, or do this for, however I'm supposed to word it. All right. So on the business cycle, we're going to have the highs and the lows, with this point up here being labeled as a peak, like the top of a mountain. And then down in the dumps here, down at the bottom, is going to be a trough. Like what animals drink/eat out of, troughs on farms, that is. So we have peaks and troughs, and all of these are going to be, all of these different movements along this are going to be what's important for us. So the process as we're moving up here, so as we're moving up and going towards the peak, what is that called? I'll give you guys a second to think about that, and also think about what it means to be going down as well. It's going to be those two important directions for our course, especially when we start talking about policy later on this week and what should be dictating fiscal and monetary policy. So, on the way up, it is called expansion. Hopefully I can write this well. Expansion. There we go, expansion. And on the way down, it's going to be called recession. As the economy expands and recesses, just depending. And, all of this is entirely natural. There can be outside events that end up ushering it in, most definitely. But for the most part, it is expected that economies go through periods of expansion and recession. I guess it's been true for hundreds of years and will likely continue to be true for a long time. It's our policy then, with automatic stabilizers and the like that end up help lessening the effects. And that's really why it's not been as bad in recent years. So that'll be the business cycle there. Now, the important thing to remember too with these, with expansion, they're all going to have their downsides and their upsides, of course, as well. Let me see if this is actually, that's a really small thing. All right, so expansion. I'm going to abbreviate this, and recession. For expansion, we're going to look at those different indicators then. We have unemployment, we have inflation, and we have GDP. And then on the other side of this, recession, we have unemployment, we have inflation, and we have GDP. Now, both of these are going to have different implications for them. They're going to interact with unemployment, these different indicators here in different ways. So, for expansion, what does it mean for unemployment? As the economy is getting bigger, more work being done, more being made, what does that mean for unemployment? It means that unemployment's going down. That's right. So unemployment's going to be going down. Because generally speaking, more people are going to have jobs. There's more of a need for jobs. Businesses can afford to hire more employees, and things of that nature. Inflation, though, what's it going to mean for inflation? That's right. It means that inflation's going to be going up. And a lot of that, if you can remember from the course when we talked about it, a lot of that's attributed to efficiency wages. Since so many more people have jobs, one of the best ways to start attracting new talent is by offering higher wages. And as, higher wages get offered somewhere, in order to compete, other places are going to have to raise their wages too. So next thing you know, that job where it was paying $50,000 a year, it might now be paying $60,000 a year because the businesses because they have to keep up and actually have employees. And with that, as they're starting to have more input prices, what does that mean for the price of their goods? It means the price of their goods is going to be going up as well. So it kind of starts spiraling out of control. Now, for GDP during expansion is probably one of the more obvious ones. What is it going to mean for GDP? As the economy gets bigger and we're making more, means that GDP is going to be going up. That is correct. So unemployment and inflation are going to be the ones that most directly impact people themselves. Whether people's money is more or less valuable and whether or not they have a job. And then recession is, generally speaking, the bad times in the economy. The silver lining, there is a silver lining to recession, though, which we'll see here in a second. So for recession and expansion, it's going to be the opposite here. So meaning that unemployment then is going to be going up. So unemployment will be going up, meaning that less people have jobs and want jobs. So the opposite of expansion here, businesses had been doing well, then usually something happens and tips us into recession. So people, they get laid off and have difficulty finding jobs because usually it's kind of correcting back to where it should have been, and a lot of the expansion just ended up kind of being overextended to begin with. So unemployment goes up. Inflation, though, and this is where we get to the silver lining, inflation goes down. That's a horrible arrow, and I'm just making it worse, actually. Wow. I just keep... It's a downwards arrow. Anyways, so inflation will be going down. Because all of those people that now don't have jobs, what are they more likely to do? They're more likely to take any job, really. As long as they're making money, they're going to be happy. So while they might have been making $50,000 a year before, if their only other option is a $35,000 a year job, they're probably going to take it. Because if it's either that or either that or lose their home, whatever it might be, they're going to take that job there. And this isn't to say that currency starts appreciating. It doesn't mean that currency is going to start going up in value. I mean, on the world stage, it might. And likely will. But as far as inflation goes, usually there is some inflation, even in this recessionary period, albeit low. But currency isn't going to inherently start earning value. It's that instead of having 2.5, 3% inflation during expansion, it's maybe down to 1.5 or even close to 2% with recession. And then GDP will be going down as well. You have less people working, meaning your economy is not operating as efficiently, people aren't buying as much, so people don't have as much incentive to make as much, and so on and so forth. So that'll be the big stuff to know with the business cycle here. And all of this right here is super, super important, of course, for understanding the aggregate model, which we're now going to start looking at. So let me see exactly what Khan Academy has in store for us here. I'll navigate back to AP Macro with all of these. I'm assuming it's going to walk through the different points first, which I can do myself here before we do practice questions. So new, don't save. So this right here is pretty much going to be the most important thing. Again, everything's related to everything in this course, but for the most part, everything's going to most directly be related back to our aggregate model. So, oh wow, that's a really bad E. But we'll fix that. Aggregate model. There we go. Aggregate model. Okay. Aggregate model. So this is going to be looking at our economy of scale here. It's going to be looking at the economy of our country, however it is you want to say it. There's going to be the 3 different lines on this one versus our regular supply and demand. But let's go ahead and start thinking about how it is that we label this. Again, graphing won't be on the test. It will not. But as far as walking your way through the problems and thinking about them, graphing very much helps. It does. You won't have to submit a graph as part of an answer, but it's good to help show your thought process and walk through it and prove what it is that you're thinking instead of just hopping into it here. So we have our 2 different axes down at the bottom and over here. So think about what each one represents here for a second before I just go ahead and do them. All right, so down at the bottom, we have real GDP or output, something along those lines. It just depends. Either are acceptable. I prefer doing real GDP, but both can work. Over on the vertical axis, then, we have price level, which is shortened to PL, price level. Meaning essentially what the value is of all of this stuff here that's being produced. And then we have our 3 different lines here on our aggregate model, which these all meet up, of course. No way they don't. They all definitely meet right there. And I'll give you guys a second to think about what it is that those different points represent. All right, so we have aggregate demand, and that's going to be the most straightforward one of the 3. And again, aggregate demand is equal to our real GDP, or just GDP in general is probably a better way of putting it, meaning that it is that CIGX there. And things that change, again, things that change CIGX, things that change GDP are going to change aggregate demand. Now, the upward sloping one is going to be our SRAS. Of course, with that short run being the SR, meaning that this is kind of where the economy is operating at right now, regardless of where it could be. So short run aggregate supply, that's what's being produced, how much is being charged for it, stuff like that. And then we have our LRAS being the vertical line there. And again, with all of our graphs, this is a simplification of reality. It isn't necessarily realistic with how it might be looked, shaped, whatever it is, but it's what we use. So this will be essentially what our economy should be capable of producing, what is natural for us. Usually, like down here, you might see like an FE for full employment. Something like that for the LRAS as well could be something else to help describe it, meaning that we're using our people effectively, something along those lines. Now, that's the model on the surface. There's 2 different positions, though, that really matter for us for our course, though, if you can remember what they are. And I'll give you a second to think about this. And this goes back to the business cycle that we just talked about, the two different states of the economy, I guess you could say. Or, I mean, there's three, but the two that are more important here. Labeling this as an A, by the way. Oh, man. A, B, and C. There we go. All right. So let's see here. So we'll get a point up here as well. This will be AD. Let's say this is 81, 82. I have this point right here, which we'll call point B. And we'll have a third aggregate demand here, which we'll call AD3. So here this will be point C. All right. So we have our three different points. The one we started off with here, if you're thinking about what that name is, kind of a self-explanatory one as far as the name goes. It's going to be our equilibrium, meaning this is where everything meets. This is like our macroeconomic equilibrium would be another one. Another way of saying this specifically, since it's meeting here on the long-run aggregate supply. And that's really, really long, so hopefully you're listening here and can write that out. Equal, there we go. Now, B and C, though, are going to be the especially relevant ones as we start going further and further into this review. So B, this is where we are operating to the right of our long-run aggregate supply, meaning that our GDP is higher, but our price level is also higher as well. And what might that? What state of the economy would that be then? Would that be a period of expansion or overextension? Or would it be a period of recession? That's right, it'd be a period of expansion, overextension, whatever you want to call it. So I always get this the name of this gap mixed up. It's expansionary or inflationary gap is what it should be called. I always say expansionary because I like to look at the positives, of course. So should be an inflationary gap there. And that's going to be, again, we're making a lot, and the country in general is doing better in a sense in that we're making more, but inflation might start getting out of control. Or, this is getting back to the whole idea of maybe people are working jobs that they're not necessarily better suited for. And yeah, good job there, Jason. It was the first one. Like I said, there's like a 30-second delay on this, unfortunately, so it's hard to really, really interact, but I appreciate the input that you've been giving so far. Oh yeah. So again, it's maybe our factories are operating more than they should. Maybe they're not having enough time for repairs, whatever it is, makes them more prone to failure, something along those lines. And then C is where we're operating to the left of our long-run aggregate supply, and we're not quite making enough. And this is the kind of what we're veering towards right now. Not quite there yet. But this is where you usually the problem is you don't have recessionary people working, and there's a ton of people out of work right now. So it's going to be our recessionary gap. Recessionary gap, meaning that unemployment's going to be higher, which we have very, very high unemployment claims right now. But the silver lining is that inflation, with people having less money to spend, inflation will start going down. So that'd be the silver lining there, as we were talking about. And then how it is that what the government or what the Fed can do will be mainly what we talk about next time. But let's go ahead and practice through some of this here with some questions from Khan Academy. Again, highly, highly recommended. Trying to see if there's some kind of good... There's a good one here. Multipliers, multipliers are an important thing. Doubt you'll be asked about them. But the idea behind the multipliers is that, government spending is going to be, it's going to be multiplied when you go through it. So, be good there. Or same thing with investment even, it gets multiplied so much based on the MPS and MPC, which I probably should go through now that I think about it. So yeah, we'll go ahead and run through the multiplier quickly. All right. So, investment spending in Gerbilia decreased by $6 billion. What measure can be used to determine the final impact of the change in investment spending on aggregate demand? So we had different multipliers here, and it looks like Khan Academy doesn't quite use the terminology that we used in class. The one that we usually use is the spending multiplier is how it's referred to. I'm assuming it's the expenditure multiplier here that it's going to be called. Balanced budget multiplier, that implies that you're looking at both tax and investment spending. Money multiplier we do use, but that is from monetary policy and what the Fed's doing, not so much with this. Tax multiplier we do use, but it's about taxes, not about investment spending. Let me see here. So what measure can be used to determine the final impact of the change in investment spending on aggregate demand? So it's probably expenditure. Yeah, that's expenditure. It's just another way of saying what we've used in class. There's a ton of different ways to describe what it is that we've talked about in our course. What will happen to the size of the expenditure multiplier and the size of the tax multiplier when the MPS increases? So this is getting back to that MPS and MPC. So if you guys take a second to think about what those are as I get this laid out. All right, so marginal propensity to save. I just gave it away. So MPS is marginal propensity to save, meaning how much of every dollar it is that people are saving. Man, this is so difficult to just write out. Marginal propensity to save, leaving you with the MPC with consume, and that is how much people are going to be spending instead. And adding them together, because this is of every dollar. How much it is of every dollar that people are going to save and how much of it they're going to consume. So what is it then that MPS plus MPC should equal to? Should equal to 1, because again, it's out of every $1. And during periods of recession and periods of expansion, there are very, very different implications with this. Like something huge we're seeing right now is that expectations as far as what the economy is doing, where it's going to be going, is a huge, huge thing. Like we have our the stimulus bill, right? People got $1,200 checks, but a lot of people, the ones that kept their jobs especially, the faith, I guess you could say, the expectation is very, very low, meaning that a lot of them just saved it away. MPS during periods of recession goes way up because people they're uncertain about the future. They don't know if they're going to keep their jobs, whatever it is. So MPS will be going up. And then MPC will be going down as a result of that. So let's get back to the question here. So what will happen to the size of the expenditure multiplier and the size of the tax multiplier when the marginal propensity to save increases? So will they both decrease? Will they both increase? And I'm going to be honest, I'm forgetting these off the top of my head. It's 1 divided by MPS, I'm pretty sure, for the spending, and then it's going to be MPC divided by MPS for the other. I'm just going to look it up though quickly because I don't want to mess up here. Let me see. Oh, here we go. Khan Academy. Okay. There we go. So wait, hold on. It's not giving me the formulas, which is pretty annoying. Here we go. Okay. So, the expenditure multiplier then is going to be, or spending multiplier as we've used. So spending mult equals 1 over 1 minus MPC, or as I said, 1 over MPS is another way of putting it. Tax multiplier is negative MPC over MPS. Okay. So what will happen to the size of the expenditure multiplier and the size of the tax multiplier when the when the MPS or marginal propensity to save increases? So if MPS is going to increase, what's that going to mean here? So you're going to start dividing 1 by a larger and larger amount. And again, same thing. I didn't write the P here. There we go. And again, same thing with the tax multiplier. It's going to be getting divided by a larger and larger amount, meaning then that the size of this multiplier then is going to decrease, because you're going to get a smaller number because you're dividing by a bigger one. Households in Iron Island save 10% of every dollar in income they receive. What will happen to aggregate demand if there's a $4 billion increase in lump sum taxes? So a lot of our work with the multipliers in general, with the tax multiplier especially, it's usually assumed that it's going to be lump sum, because past that it gets more and more widespread as far as the impact goes, as far as time goes with that. So that said, let's go ahead and work through this here. So households in the Iron Island save 10% of every additional dollar in income they receive. So if they're saving 10% of every dollar, what does that mean for our MPS? What is our MPS and what is our MPC? Don't really want to have to get rid of this because this is good stuff. I wish the eraser was bigger. It'd be very nice, but alas. All right. So that means then for this problem, I'll write it up here, I guess. So if it's 10% that they're saving, that means then that they're saving 10% of every dollar. That means that MPS is going to be equal to 0.1, and MPC is going to be equal to 0.9. Now, back to this then, getting to the multiplier part of it. What will happen to aggregate demand if there is a $4 billion increase in lump sum taxes? Now, since we're doing taxes, that means we are using the tax multiplier, which is MPC over MPS, or negative MPC over negative MPS, or sorry, over just regular MPS, meaning that we will be doing negative 0.9 over 0.1, giving us negative 9. That is correct. So we have negative 9, and since it's a multiplier, what are we going to do with it? That's right. We're going to multiply it by the 4 billion there. So negative 9 times 4 equals negative 36, because it is an increase in taxes. Since it's an increase, that means it's going to be our contractionary policy that we talked about and will talk about in the future. So it's a negative 36, so it means that real GDP will decrease by 36 billion. Good job. All right. Nation of Johns Rudia has a marginal propensity to consume of 0.9. So the same kind of thing we were just looking at. There's an autonomous increase in new home construction of 10 billion. What will happen to real GDP? Now, this one is kind of tricky because new homes are one of the tricky things in our calculation of GDP. What part of GDP is it included in? I'll give you a second to think about that. Yeah, it's included in investment spending. It's not actually included in consumption, because it's seen as buying a resource in a sense. It's seen as buying land in a lot of ways, meaning that it's investment, and investment's going to be spending essentially in those resources there. So it will be considered an investment, meaning that it's likely going to do what if it is considered investment spending? It's going to increase by more than 10 billion, less than 10 billion. We're going into the 9 billions there with the multiplier. Means that it's probably going to be more. Because again, since this is investment or government spending, like the angle that we used in class was government spending, but another angle for it is investment spending as well. It's the same idea where if a business is spending money, then it's going to end up getting into people's hands eventually, and they spend it, and so on and so on and so on and so on, until it's pennies that are being spent. So should be that real GDP will increase by more than 10 billion, because again, new homes are considered investment spending, but we'll see. Yeah, okay, just making sure. All right, good job there. Now we'll move on to the last thing here with a couple questions for the ADAS model in general. Yeah, we'll probably do this quiz here. 5 questions in 30 minutes. That sounds good. Probably do this quiz here and then call it for today. If it, it doesn't want to load though. Let me see. Start quiz again. Let's go. All right, yeah, quiz won't work actually, so that's good. Self-adjustment would be a big thing. We probably I don't know if the demand pull and cost push will be a big important for this necessarily. I mean, there's different types of inflation, whether it be that which one's dragging it along. Equilibrium in the ADAS model is probably going to be very helpful for what we've been talking about. Maybe. I guess it just doesn't want to work right now, which is very unfortunate. Oh, that's okay. We can... Oh, there we go. Okay. So the current state of the economy and Dodge Land is represented by the graph shown here. So we were just talking about this a little bit earlier before I went off on the tangent about the multipliers. I apologize. This wasn't in a better order, but I forgot about the multipliers. So it's a good thing we're doing these questions. And that's why I'm doing the review like this is, there's just so many things to talk about with such a limited amount of time. And I'm trying to, get all the most important stuff out as best I can. Anyways, best describes economic conditions. So we have our 3 different lines here, and we talked about the different gaps earlier. So we have our LRAS, SRAS, and AD. Now, our equilibrium currently is to the right of the long run, meaning what? There is a gap. You see the gap right here, since the point's right here. What does that mean for our gap since it's to the right? This is where our price levels are up, and GDP. GDP is up as well, or could be up. I mean, I guess it depends on what's changed here. So our options are positive output gap, an unemployment rate equal to the natural rate of unemployment. So this one right here, not going to be true for B, because if we're operating on our natural rate, we'd be operating somewhere along the long-run aggregate supply. And again, this is, meaning that more people are working than usual, whether that be people are taking worse jobs than what they're capable of, that's our people with engineering degrees or history degrees like mine, working in, grocery stores, things of that nature. Long-run equilibrium, we're currently not in long-run equilibrium. We're operating past that. We're not operating on the LRAS. A recession. Again, if we're doing a recession, that means we're making less. We're making less than we need to, or should be, rather. We're operating to the left of the long run, so probably not that. And negative output gap, it's another way of saying recession, so it will be A, because, we're making more. It's a positive output gap. And again, it's usually when we're operating here, it means that inflation is going to be higher than it regularly would be. Which point or points in the graph shown here represent a short-run equilibrium level of output? So this is a difference in those equilibriums here. So A isn't an equilibrium because it's not where everything's meeting. B, not where everything's meeting. C, not where everything's meeting. E, not where everything's meeting. D is the only one where things are meeting. So that's essentially what equilibrium means. It means it's where things are meeting. Now, since it's short run though, it's a short run equilibrium because it's where just the short run aggregate supply is meeting the short run aggregate demand. If all 3 of these met on the same spot back here, then it'd be the long run equilibrium, but it will be D here instead. If you're asked about C on a test, it might be the point where there's full employment, something like that. E would be like the current output level. A, it's a tough call on A and B, what those might be asking. Well, I actually incorrectly selected that. Look at that. So, short run equilibrium level of output. Let me see. I was wrong. That's crazy. Never seen before. Real GDP that an economy is producing at any point in time is determined by the short run equilibrium. Short run equilibrium is the output and price level associated with the intersection of AD and the SRAS. In this graph, the point where AD and SRAS point D, but that does not represent the output that is being produced. The output is always found on the horizontal axis. Oh, okay. Yeah, see, I was wrong because I was misinterpreting the question. So it would be E. So I actually just explained that, like if it was asking what the output would be. then that's what it would be looking for. So yeah, it's just me getting caught up in the wording of the questions. Fortunately, yeah, it's A, Jason. Good job. So yeah, it is E, because it's only asking about output, and that's it. You're not concerned with anything else. It's not concerned with the price level. So yeah, again, just make sure you're paying attention to the wording. And again, since there's no multiple choice questions, you don't have to worry about getting caught up in the wording as much this year, though. There we go. So based on this graph, which of the following is true about Verminville? The economy is in short-run equilibrium, but not in long-run equilibrium. It's meeting here on the long run, so it is in long-run equilibrium. The actual unemployment rate equals the natural rate of unemployment. It's probably B, because we're operating on the long-run aggregate supply, and actual is operating there. Getting lost in the wording. The country has cyclical unemployment, but no structural. So like we talked about last time, when we're talking about the natural rate of unemployment, it is frictional plus structural, and cyclical is not included. So that would mean that there is no cyclical unemployment, and there will be structural unemployment. So it's not going to be C. The current unemployment rate is lower than the natural unemployment rate. So if it was lower than the natural rate of unemployment, that means that we'd be operating somewhere over here. And the economy is at a peak in its business cycle. If it was at a peak in its business cycle, again, it'd be assumed that it'd be operating somewhere over here. So, actual unemployment rate equals natural. And again, once we talk about the Phillips curve, within the relations here, this will hopefully make a lot more sense if you're not quite remembering it. So good job there. Which of the following best describes this nation's economy? So they're currently operating to the right of their long run. So, economy has a recessionary gap. So if it was a recessionary gap, that means they'd be making less than normal. They're currently making more than normal, so probably not a recessionary gap. Real GDP is equal to full employment output. If it was full employment output, again, that'd be operating on the LRAS, so it's very likely not to be B. The economy is experiencing economic growth. Could be that, because they're starting to produce more than they're naturally capable of. There could be new technology that's not fully developed yet, but some people are using it, something like that. Positive output gap, probably going to be the answer there. Because with C, it's also, if they are experiencing it, then the long run would be shifting. So there you go. So positive output gap, likely that. Again, the one that we usually use is inflationary gap in our course. But it is positive because it's more than normal. And in long run equilibrium, it's not operating on the long run, so not likely to be that. There we go. Good job. All right. Let me just check through these big topics here. So we got equilibrium, changes in the short run. So changes in the short run, shifts in aggregate demand. That'd be a good thing to look through, but again, anything that'll impact GDP will impact the aggregate demand. We'll probably look at that and then call it quits. Long run self-adjustment, that's going to be things like welfare, especially where it's those automatic stabilizers that we talked about. When the economy enters or begins to maybe enter a recession, this is kind of what we're experiencing right now. When it might enter it, we have welfare kick in, meaning that people still have monies, they're still spending money, and it's not going to end up getting to like a full-blown depression or anything like that. So we'll check out short-run changes. Shocks are included in this. Yeah, shocks are a huge thing right now, not even just with the coronavirus situation, but also with essentially what OPEC and just generally what the negative demand shock is too as well at the same time leads to incredible prices for gasoline, as I'm sure you've noticed. So we'll have an RGDP, unemployment, and price level if there's a negative shock to aggregate demand. So we'll clear all this off and quickly draw out a graph here. So make sure we label it correctly as well. Okay, so we got RGDP, we got price level, we got aggregate demand, we got short-run aggregate supply, and we got long run aggregate supply. So if it's a negative shock, that means it's going to be decreasing. If it was a positive shock, it'd be increasing. So aggregate demand would be going to aggregate demand 2 here. So negative shock. What will happen to GDP, unemployment, and price level? So we're moving from point A here to point B, meaning that our real GDP is going to be going down, price level is going to be going down, and unemployment is going to be above the natural level, meaning that so unemployment's up, GDP is down, and price level is down as well. So it's very likely A. Just make sure you read through all of them here. Am I allowed to use? So Jason, yes, to answer your question, the test is open note, open book. It's the only thing that's very strictly prohibited is other people. Any kind of communication with other people is forbidden. There are like auditors that they've hired, like corporate fraud auditors, so definitely make sure you're not having any kind of communication on it. They've stated that the questions are not easily searchable, I guess you could say. So it's not going to be like definition type questions, stuff like that. It's going to be applying it. But something that I've been recommending so far is creating kind of a cheat sheet that you can use, similar to the note cards that we did in class. Of just basic stuff, like essentially what we're doing right now. With like shocks, like what'll happen with different changes, just maybe the labeling on the graphs in general, things like that. But again, to answer the question more directly, yes, you can. How will they know? I'm not exact. Like, there's been guides that they've sent out, I guess you could say, to the testing experience. I know with a lot of colleges, when they have people take tests for online classes, they just have like a webcam on them, record them, something like that. I'm not 100% sure of the process because I haven't read through the all of the information that they've been pushing out. There might also be like a browser lockdown on your computer when you do it, so like you can't go to different tabs, but I think it's essentially open internet as well. Don't quote me on that one. I'm not 100% sure. So I mean, it might be checking for like programs like Discord or whatever it is where you can speak with others. Another thing too, though, is just the same way that teachers could end up catching you sometimes with the other people. So like, if they notice two people have very similar answers on a question, like almost word for word, then it's obvious that there's direct communication there, especially if it's like, you and somebody from our school, or you or somebody from like Guy or something like that. It'd be evidence of it as well. So I didn't know if there. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure. I really should read more through it. But especially with the way that it's being done, like being able to submit questions from like your phone and things like that, I'm not 100% sure. I know like the format, and that there's like, so much time to do it, and then you have like 5 minutes to upload, whatever it is, but I'm still not 100% sure on the process. I'll try to look in. I'll make myself a note and look more into that and see if I can get you guys the relevant information. Just writing this down here. All right. Back to it. Oh, are cryptocurrencies good or bad for economy? I mean, I'm not a fan of them. I don't think they're good. It's fake money, furthermore on fake money, so it just depends. So let's see here. So what will happen in real GDP, unemployment, and price level if there is a negative shock to aggregate demand? So anyways, looking at our graph, so GDP's down, price level's down, and unemployment's up, so likely to be A. There we go. All else equal, what happens to price level and unemployment when investment spending by firms increases? So investment spending, what is investment part of? Think about that here for a second. It is part of aggregate demand. That is right, because again, aggregate demand is a fancy way of saying GDP, essentially. Meaning that if investment spending is increasing, that means our aggregate demand is shifting to the right, meaning that GDP is up, price level is up, and unemployment will be down. So price level is up, unemployment won't be up. There won't be no change in price level. Price level will not decrease. So it's going to be one of these two with price level. So unemployment will be decreasing because, as we're moving in this direction, as there's more investment spending, people can afford to hire more employees or whatever else it might be. So it would be D there. Which of the following options best describes what would lead to a higher price level? So higher price level, meaning that something's going to happen to the point where we're going up in this direction. So decrease in aggregate demand would not work. Decrease in short-run aggregate supply, would that work? So if we're going to, this is getting really crowded, I realize, and I apologize for that. Again, Paint, not the best program. But essentially we'd be going from point A to point Z here. So that would be a thing. So decrease in short-run aggregate supply, increase in aggregate demand, so either of those work. And it's going to be, there we go. Increase in aggregate demand or decrease in short-run aggregate supply, and there we go. And then let's see, what would would a decrease in business regulations have in the short run? Decrease in business regulations. One of the examples I like giving in class is maybe like environmental regulations would be a big thing. If coal was all of a sudden, they're heavily burned again, part of the reason why it isn't, it's not the cleanest energy source. Or if emissions are a huge thing. If emissions could just be whatever companies want, it's very much going to end up going to impact the production side of things. So it'd be something to do with the short-run aggregate supply, most likely, or just aggregate supply in general. So let's see here. So positive aggregate supply shock and increase in the rate of economic growth. As far as economic growth goes, it's only talking about the short run, so growth probably wouldn't be included in this at all. Negative aggregate supply shock, not going to be a negative shock because if it was tighter regulations, it'd be negative. But since they're loosening and businesses can do more of what they want, it won't be negative. Negative aggregate demand shock, not going to impact demand. Positive demand, not going to impact demand. A positive short-run aggregate supply shock and lower inflation. So if it's going to be a positive shock, that means we'll go from SRAS1 here over to SRAS2. Compared along the same one, there would be a lower price level, meaning that inflation would be lower. So it's going to be my guess there, yes. So economic growth is only going to be, because the short run is what we're focusing on. All right. So again, trying to keep these to an hour and a half, somewhere in that neighborhood. Don't want this to go on too long. I know you guys got other stuff to do for your other classes. Classes that you're actually taking right now. So that's going to be where we call it today. We got through what we wanted to get through there. A lot of the long run stuff, we'll talk about when we get to for economic growth with our last unit 5. In the future too, now that we're getting into the meat really of our course, I'm probably going to maybe send out 1 or 2 questions for you guys to look at and practice at home, and then we'll go over together on the stream, especially for our last session I have scheduled for the day of the test actually, just for that last minute stuff. Again, like I talked about earlier, having some kind of cheat sheet be a good idea. Similar to the note cards that we used in class, something along those lines. Thank you guys for showing up, participating in chat. I'm going to try to look into the procedures for the test a little bit more so I can better answer the questions and hopefully get those answers to you either next time or I'll try to send them out an email as well. And until then, if you have any questions, please, do not hesitate to ask. Don't hesitate to email me. Anything like that. Also, again, if there's anything I can be doing better with these, please let me know. Maybe a suggestion with the format. I mean, again, Paint, obviously, if I could find a good replacement for that, that'd probably be the best improvement I can make. But other than that, wish you guys well in these times, and I will